The amount of internal conflict that's going on in the United States, the size of the wealth gaps, the size of the political conflicts is the greatest since not only the 30 to 45 period, it's much greater than that, 1900. You have to go back to 1900 to have that conflict. We're having a form of a civil war where populism is one side in a battle with the other side that won't accept losing. That's why in the next elections, there's a good chance that neither side will accept the result and accept losing. History shows that when the causes people are behind are more important to them than the system is in jeopardy. Right now, there's not much agreement and the polarity is becoming greater. The political right now, if you follow politics, if you even watch events like, what will the reaction be to Supreme Court making the decision of Roe versus Wade? Why are moderates in the political system choosing not to run for re-election? We have this internal conflict that is actually threatening rule of law and the adherence to the Constitution. It's entirely possible that people with different views, they will go to different places and they will fight. So that degree has never happened in my lifetime before. I was born in 1949. 1945 was when the New World Order began. These world orders happen because there's a conflict and then somebody wins. So that brings me to the third thing that's happening, which is the rise of a great power to be comparable, China, and with it, Russia, and they form alliances, right? There's the Allied powers and the Axis powers, two different sides, kind of, and then they're competing. Because what happens is when you have a new world order, the winners of the war get to set the rules. So in 1945, America won, and it was the richest country in the world. It had 80% of the world's gold, and gold was money. And it had 50% of the world's economy, and it had a monopoly on military power. And so it set the rules, and that's why the UN is in New York, and the World Bank and IMF are in Washington, D.C. It set the rules. So that's changing. There are certain things that we're doing. We're spending a lot more than we're earning. We're living off the printing presses. We're letting the infrastructure go. We're giving our next generation debts. We're not educating all children well. And we have a world order battle. There is an Allied and Axis power kind of thing that is emerging. There's certainly a competition. There are 5 different kinds of wars. There's a trade war. There's a technology war. There is a geopolitical influence war. There's a capital war. And there could be a military war. There is a military war now in Europe with Russia. And those are the patterns of history. And there's only one way to do well, and that is to be strong in all those ways. So I'm very bipartisan. I believe the opposite of the polarity, the extremes of the left or the right. I pray for the middle and bipartisanship to find ways. I've watched the process evolve in the cycle. So what happens is you have the war, you have the new rules. Wars are sort of great equalizers, and then you come back. And then you have a period of peace and prosperity. You have peace because nobody wants to fight the dominant power, and you have more equal people, and then they have prosperity. But the way the system works is over a period of time, that creates differences in wealth. And that's fine. You provide capital, that's the capital system. People with great ideas come along and they're productive and inventive and they produce great things and so on. But as they obtain the greater wealth, they also obtain greater benefits, like they could educate their children better. And if you're poor, you don't get to educate your children better. And so the polarity increases and it becomes unfair because, we all should have like equal opportunity. And then you also build up a lot of debt. Here's the irony of it. As these cycles begin at their later stages, the rich are the ones who get into debt. Now, you would think it's exactly the opposite. It's easier to have a good living standard and save. But like the United States, when per capita income was 40 times that in China, it started to borrow from China because they have a big saving mentality. When you have a poor person who doesn't have much, they want to save. Their saving is in our currency because when they think, how do I save in world currency? I'm going to buy dollar-denominated debt and I'm going to save in it when we borrow. And that's been the case. We didn't experience what our prior generations experienced. I know my dad went through World War II. He went through depression and war. His mentality is very different in terms of, what you take for granted or how you save. And that creates a cycle. One man's debts are somebody else's assets. The world right now is holding a lot of money in debt instruments. It could be money market funds. It could be bond funds. And we were in an environment in which bonds went up for 40 years and everybody's comfortable, and there wasn't an inflation pressure. And so everybody thinks that cash is the safest place to be because they don't think about its buying power. And so what happens is you have to satisfy both the debtors and the creditors, which is difficult to do when you've got more. Okay, you got a lot of debt. Because if you pay that debt back in real money, in hard money, so the guy gets paid back the buying power that he lent, that is going to be really bad because you won't have enough money. So the easiest tax is to tax through the printing of money. And that's because, like, nobody asked where did the money come from. You know, the checks came in and we're all happy and we didn't take the money away from anybody, but you lose the buying power. So as you get the inflation for that, you get the behavior change. So still, like, you have to make a choice. Do you want to own that stuff or not? And so what happens is when you make that choice that you don't want to own it, you sell it. And so the amount of selling is not just the deficit. The government will have a deficit of 5 or 6% of GDP. It'll have to borrow. So that means it sells bonds or sells debt of 5 or 6% of GDP.